Greetings, my name is David and I am a web developer. In 2015, I was working on a self-help mental health website with a psychologist. At that time, I was looking at our current approach to mental health care and felt that it was deeply flawed. So I created my own behavior model. I threw out the DSM and depression along with it and replaced it with something called self-esteem issues. In the first part of this video, we're going to talk about exactly what those are. In the second part of the video, we're going to look at the development issues. What happens as a child that makes these issues arise? After that, we're going to look at the foresight process, which is a cognitive behavior therapy-like system that you can use to change how you feel. And finally, we're going to end up with some practical tips to give you some guides as to little things you can do to improve your life. Welcome to Depression Redefined. So I'm going to start with a decent amount of theory, but that's needed in order to support the logic of the improvement process. With that, let's get to the model. The foresight model says our consciousness is effectively composed of two processes: self-esteem, which is how we look at the past, and self-confidence, how we plan the future. In order for both to function properly, for us to accurately model reality, we need to be able to answer two questions each. We'll ignore the self-confidence questions because they're not relevant here. For self-esteem, those questions are, am I good and do I have value? They roughly correlate with guilt and shame. Now keep in mind that these are all conceptual because we are talking about a model of the brain and not a software program. Nonetheless, we will define these terms as much as we can to help your understanding. For example, guilt comes from doing the wrong thing and shame comes from not doing the right thing. So that's the first step. Replacing the ambiguous depression label with the concept of inaccurately looking at the past. Now let's look at how those inaccuracies might come to be. Our first 3 years are key, as that's when the first version of our brain develops. It remains forever malleable, but certainly this attachment period, as it's called, is hugely important, and we'll see why that is next. After all, we aren't born with emotions, only feelings. During this period, we are given the foundation meaning to those feelings. For am I good, when we enter this world, we are supposed to be cherished just for existing. We learn that by having positive interactions with our caregivers. However, if enough of those interactions are negative, we can believe that there is something wrong with us, like when we feel good and smile and they don't smile back. Now, children are very resilient, so we don't have to be perfect, but if this happens enough, a pattern will be set. So how does this happen? The two main ways are via abuse and neglect. Now, in both cases, we learn to feel bad, but interestingly enough, abuse seems to drive our under-experiencing guilt and neglect our over-experiencing it. In both cases, we can think that negative physical sensations are the norm, but the coping mechanisms are different. Under-guilt yields anger, and over-guilt yields feelings of abandonment. For do I have value, there is right and wrong, and there are choices. As children, we should be able to make our own choices, and they should be celebrated. However, when a parent arbitrarily limits that choice, the toddler is left with the conclusion that there is something wrong with them, hence shame. As with guilt, criticism of our choices yields over-experiencing shame, and a person who is sensitive and defensive. Whereas ignoring of choices yields under-experiencing shame, and an adult who can be boastful. This differs from guilt, though, as it tends to be situational, like when someone disagrees with us or we have to stick up for ourselves. In both cases, they have something to prove, but, again, the coping mechanisms are different. One is internal, the other external. For better or worse, we perceive the present by looking at the past. And if our memories have this negative emotional coloring, then it's going to impact how we see the present. And you can see how from an early age, this is just going to build upon itself and skew how we see the world. Now let's look at how emotions undermine this whole process. To understand CORE, which stands for commit, observe, reflect, and edit, we need to talk about emotions first. During the course of the day, both our conscious and subconscious are constantly processing input, making sense of it by comparing it to our memories, and then drawing conclusions. In the case of the subconscious, though, it communicates that end result through our body. Feelings, or when we assign them a label and call them an emotion, are physical sensations caused by those subconscious conclusions. Keep in mind two key things. First off, the feelings are from our subconscious, so we don't know how that conclusion was made. And correlating this with the origin section, we can see how the meaning we give feelings can be skewed because of childhood patterns. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem, as we can both manage the process as well as improve the accuracy of our subconscious. Unfortunately, we don't have this knowledge and are usually, in fact, taught the opposite: to go with our gut, trust our intuition, follow our instinct, and so on. And that's what causes all of our problems. And that's how it's all connected. We have the subconscious influence which impacts us all day long. And because of development issues, it is skewed negatively, but we don't know any better. So as a result, because all our memories are telling us the same thing, we assume that they're correct, even though this feeling is actually inaccurate. So the question then becomes, what can we do about that? As for the process itself, we basically tell you that you need to learn how to get into your body so that you can recognize when these physical sensations are happening and therefore affecting your thinking based upon how you feel. Instead of responding, pause and use your higher level reasoning to verify what those feelings are. Typical questions include, am I really being threatened here? And what is motivating this other person to say or do what they did? That's when you're with someone else, of course. When you're alone, it then becomes, is my body misleading me? And in the case of self-esteem issues, it's, is this malaise an echo of the past that is not relevant to the current situation? The process then becomes learning how to not get stuck on the emotion. Yes, it is telling you subconsciously that you're not good and don't deserve better, but that's not the case. Instead, you have to push through this feeling and include others whenever possible and write new stories. Eventually, the new stories will start to overwhelm the old stories, and you will notice a difference. There are 4 happy hormones: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. More than likely, you are not producing enough of them. It doesn't mean you can't. It means that after living the pattern of your life for however many years it's been, you're not used to feeling them, so you're not conditioned to do things to get them, and you can change that. The main tip we have is around muscle memory. That's where you have to do something right X amount of times in a row in order for your body to become used to it. Feelings are the same way, so we have a 3-month challenge. The details are to go for a walk for at least 1 hour each day with music, and then socialize with someone else for at least an hour each day, separate from that. Simple, but potentially not easy, so we highly recommend you're making a commitment to others to get them to support you. And if you can do it without interruption, 2 big things will happen. First off, you'll be feeling better. Second, you'll be teaching yourself that you can actively engage in action that makes you feel better. The other big tip we have is a lot simpler. We suggest that you never just sit with your negative thoughts. Always at least journal them down, if not talk with someone about them. Thoughts are a dead end. When you manifest those thoughts, however, you can manage them. And as for talking to someone, we suggest telling other people about what you are doing so they can learn how to support you. That saying things just like, think happy thoughts, are actually damaging, but that making you accountable to things that you want to do are acceptable. Now, there are plenty of other tips that you can find online, and they all pretty much have to do with reversing the inaction. Remember, doing nothing is a choice. This video isn't meant to be a complete package. It's meant to give you an introduction and to let you know that there are alternatives out there. Now, my website has more information, and I'm constantly adding new content. The truth is, the mental health care field really isn't great at giving support to this issue, and your community probably isn't much better. At the same time, if this is an issue that you struggle with, you have to recognize that the likelihood that you're going to make substantial success on your own is very small. So I say, reach out to other people and don't associate anything negative with it. Look at it as having the courage to ask other people for help for honestly something that we should all be comfortable doing anyway. After all, emotions are a team sport. Thank you for watching.